program contains material that viewers may find unsuitable for younger children. A parental control system is advised. The following program contains opinions of the participants and does not reflect the views and beliefs of the Derana Media Network. The network believes in a safe space for all ideas to be expressed and on its duty to create such a platform for free speech. Viewer discretion is strictly advised. For a real view, real opinion, and for an honest conversation, it's time to Get Real with Mahieash Johnney. Tonight, coming to you from Studio 24 in Colombo.
A very good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Get Real. Well, the budget has passed. I'm pretty sure during the weekend you have got some time in order to take a look at the numbers, or you might not be interested at all because, it is from our politicians, so you might be thinking it's the same old. Kind of it is, but let's break down the numbers and try to understand logically, are these real targets that have been given, and is it more or less contributing to the growth of our nation? Now that's the most important part. Are we going to have more money in our pockets at the end of the fiscal year of 2026, or are we going to get more broken promises? So this is basically what we are trying to get a hold of this time around. As you know, here on Get Real, we're not going to go with the whole mainstream media ideological point of view. We want to give you a different take, a realistic approach where you can actually see tangibly as to where we are as a nation economically and where are we heading as per the numbers and the data. In order to analyze this, Dr. Kenneth Zilwa is back again. Good to see you once again, back-to-back 2 weeks. It's a pleasure to have you once again, Doctor. Global Business Cycle Analyst. Real pleasure you coming on the show, especially after, you gave a little bit of a preview as to what to expect prior to the budget. Yes. So let's break it down after the numbers as well. And joining me tonight, I think first time on Get Real, but many times on State of the Nation, I believe. Shiran, Illanperuma, political economist. Thank you very much, Shiran. Good to see you. You might see a baby face, but don't make any assumption. This is an economic powerhouse, so to speak, a real economic mind who thinks differently, and that difference is why I'm very attracted to him in terms of his entire way of thinking and bringing in this different point of view onto the table, so you and I can discuss a different point of view rather than going with the entire, the liberal way of saying things. My talking points, so let's get into the budget. Let me start off with you, Doctor, very shortly. What do you think about the 2026 budget proposals?
To be honest, Mahieash, for me, the budget in its own entire framework seems to be a continuation of the 2025 particular maiden budget presented by the NPP government. Now, there are some salient points in that which are quite attractive when they talk about the industrial sector and the particular incentivization that they have carved out for the industry sector. But in 2025, we didn't see that translate into tangible action. And as a result of that, we've seen our trade deficit continue to widen and our reliance on further external borrowing continue to deepen. And it's a continuation of that same thought process that comes through in the 2026 budget. Why I say that, if you look at the budget numbers, the current account deficit, which needs to be financed, has increased from a year-on-year basis, which means that another close to upon ₹1 trillion has to be financed because it's consumption-related import expenditure that's coming into the budget financing requirement. So all in all, when you look at those conditions, makes me kind of wonder whether we are really heading into another catastrophe. And that's something that I'm very, very worried for this country.
That's exactly what we are trying to figure out as well, whether there is a path. There are lots of allocations, Shiran, that the president made. I think the most number goes to the Ministry of Finance. And when the minister, now the Deputy Minister of Finance, Dr. Anil Chanthafernando, was here right where you are seated, I asked this question as to, because the appropriation bill came prior, and when he came and I asked, why do you need the highest number of allocation? Because when it comes to, the finance ministry, the finance ministry has to do all the other work. So this should go to education, this should go to healthcare, but those are way down in the line. Public administration, healthcare is like the fourth highest, and defense is like the fifth, education and higher education is like the sixth. So in terms of numbers there, so what he said was apparently lots of things, if you go by line by line within the finance ministry, so a lot of things have been put into the finance ministry, especially with the Clean Sri Lanka program, and now the I think I can't remember the English tagline, but I know the single one, which Ivatvenu apparently for the drug operation that the government is hoping to do. In your point of view, Shiran, what do you think about the budget proposal?
Oh, what can I say about the budget?
That says a lot about the budget.
Yeah. Well, you know how constrained we are. So when you count the interest payments that are due, when you count the recurrent expenditure, really we're counting pennies at the end of the day. But it is what it is. So let's look at the budget. What interested me most is the kind of, at least the rhetorical commitment to, as Dr. Kenneth said, industrialization, manufacturing. But there was also a lot of talk about public investment. And from the first budget onwards, there's been a nominal increase. It was about 3.2%, I think, and now it's about 4%, right? The public investment. That is concerning when you pair it with what their actual medium-term growth target is. So they've said they're going to try and maintain about a 4% public investment, but they want to achieve 7% of economic growth.
In 2032.
In 2032, in the medium term. And mathematically, that does not make sense to me.
That was one of the questions I want to ask. Now, if you are saying out loud, the president of this country in our nation's parliament saying by 2032, he was so sure about those numbers, by 2032, the growth is going to be 7%. If you look at the current budget proposal and what they have allocated and how they are basically giving the blueprint of what the economic projection and the economic pathway to that 7% mark, do you see a pathway?
Well, they need to achieve something like 37 to 38% of GDP in terms of investment, right? If you look at the...
Is it FDIs?
No, total investment.
Gross fixed capital formation.
Yeah, gross fixed formation. And, well, there's this concept in economics called the incremental capital output ratio. So you divide the investment, the public investment, the total investment by the growth. So you figure out how much investment you need to get a given amount of growth. When you do that, you come to a number that's about 37%, which is 10% higher than what we are currently doing. Now, if the government is only investing 4%, that means another 33% has to come from the private sector. So that's basically 90% of your investment requirement has to come from the private sector, right? So their whole gambit is to try and attract that private sector investment. But it's not clear to me that the existing incentive package is actually going to work, because what they're depending on is basically ease of doing business, which is not a bad thing. I support it. If you can make doing business easier, that's fine. But there's so many other structural things. We don't have a domestic industrial supply chain. Energy costs are extremely high. So we're not competitive in terms of export-oriented investments. At the same time, we have something like a 25% poverty rate, right? So the home market, demand in the home market is low. So even if you want to have investment serving the home market, that's also not attractive. So you need a much more dynamic package of institutional reform to get investment going. It's not going to work with the current fiscal allocations.
Doctor, one thing that you said last week keeps reverberating in my mind, which you said when we were talking, you were just giving the example of tourism, just tourism. You were saying that we are always harping on the numbers. The numbers are good, numbers are good, numbers are good. Yeah, okay. But you're not adding the part where how many the amount of money that is going out from Sri Lanka by Sri Lankans itself in terms of revenue. So we are not deducting that particular portion and telling the accurate number. Now, I see a lot of that. Just listening to Shiran right now, what he said, like, the poverty rate, the areas where we don't have structural elements in order to support this kind of growth. Right now, we don't have that. And yet we are talking high and mighty and showcasing these, flowery numbers on the paper. Reality is completely stark. Yeah. But right now, real investors out there who are really thinking, they're not going by the word of the politician. They're going with the numbers, like how you all actually look into. What does the numbers say, and what does the hopes and dreams of these politicians say?
So if you look at it from a purely, I like to view Sri Lanka as a corporate entity. That's the easiest we can refer it to. Then these numbers tend to make a lot of more sense. So if you take the total revenue lines, if you take our national revenue, we end up on an annual basis net after inflows and outflows with about a deficit of about $1.4 billion, $1.5 billion. Now that has happened over the last 7 years, 6 to 7 years, from even 2014, 15 right up to that point. And then in 2022, because of the particular package of the IMF, due to the contraction, we have managed to save some amount of money, and that deficit figure is about 1.4 billion surplus now. That's what you accumulate, and ultimately that goes into the reserve number that we are looking at. So if you take the cash flows and then you take our net international investment position, which is your balance sheet technically, where you trade with the external sector and the external sector trades with you, the net liabilities on the national balance sheet as at today, as at I think it was June 2025, the numbers that I have, our net negative net worth is about $52 billion, right? Which, after all the IMF programs, 17 packages that we have received, plus the debt restructuring that we have gone through, there is a marginal reduction of about $1.5 billion. Now my question is, Mahieash, is it worth it that we have contracted the economy, contracted growth, contracted capital investment, increased our debt servicing? Remember, our debt servicing amount is almost 50% of our total revenue. So which comes to Shiran's point he was making. Once you pay your debt and you service that, the balance is what you are left to do all the other things.
What I'm asking is, like, if you look at the numbers in terms of how they have allocated for Ministry of Finance 634 billion rupees, Provincial Council and Local Government, for them 618 billion rupees, Public Administration Ministry gets around 596 billion rupees. Now these are numbers that have been provided now for health and for healthcare, basically 554 billion rupees, and for the defense ministry around 455 billion rupees. Now these are numbers and proposals that the government is hoping to make. Is it with the money that they have at hand, or what they're hoping to get? Because does this make sense right now? You're talking about servicing debt, and that's going to come at the end of 2027. At that particular point, with these particular numbers, obviously are these real numbers, or are these?
So these are estimates to begin with, right? So because a budget is.
No, what I'm saying is, can they actually spend this amount?
I mean,
do they have that?
Yeah. So it is not it's not zero-based budget. It's incremental budget. So year on year, there is a percentage increase that they put onto this, and then it's recasted. So these numbers make sense because it's historic numbers that we are looking at, and a percentage increment on top of that. So the expenditure works out that way. Even the revenue is the same, because revenue, they know what the collection is going to be, and they must be forecasting further increment in the revenue base, particularly in the VAT, broad basin of the VAT. That's a huge chunk in the total revenue that we collect, almost about 800 billion to about a trillion, 1.2 trillion comes in from VAT, domestic and foreign collections of VAT. That will obviously have a significant component with the broad basin of the VAT base. Again, they are reduced a threshold, which means some smaller entities are liable to pay VAT. So there is good and bad in that. One is on the revenue side, that will come into the fiscal, but the negative side is the smaller businesses, which are already suffering significantly, will have to have billing systems, will have to have books. I mean, all that is a process of getting us to that particular mark of 15.3%, which is the IMF target. But more importantly, Mahieash, I think, these numbers, as it is, if you look at it in terms of what has happened, even the public investment that we spoke about last year has not been utilized.
Yeah, exactly.
About 300 billion only has been utilized from that 1.5 billion that was allocated. So these numbers, as I said, if it makes sense, it must be put into action, and there must be tangible proof, asset creation on the ground. Public investment is asset creation also, right? Infrastructure, then arteries of the roads. We were talking about inputs for manufacturing, because we really need to look at Sri Lanka and see how we are going to reduce the dependency on our current account, because that current account deficit feeds into the budget deficit. Now, we are not doing that. In fact, we are increasing it further. And I'll give you another classic example. Out of that total expenditure, external expenditure, consumer imports on a year-on-year basis has increased by 50%. Consumer imports from 1.3 billion to about...
You gave the numbers last week when you were here as well.
So my point is, we are saying tourism, right? We are looking at gross revenue there again, coming to your point. Sri Lankans traveling abroad is about $1 billion net. So ultimately the net tourism figure is significantly lower. That's what I told you. Our net international investment position is a reflection of the net numbers. So even though we say we have got 6 billion gross reserves, our balance sheet is still negative $52 billion. So what are we doing to reduce that gap is my concern.
Shiran, one of the things that we have been talking, I think, for quite some time, I think since the 2022 crisis, is how Sri Lanka can come out of this. Even last week we were speaking, Doctor, is that Sri Lanka actually looking at what we can create here and basically create, providing the supply to the demand locally so that we can save whatever internally rather than buying from outside. The doctor said, if it has increased 50%, which means it is the same tune that we used to have prior to the 2022 crisis, and we are going in that particular path. How do you see in terms of what the government's proposals are? Because despite the fact that the government continuously say, hey, hang on, we're very different, we're not the same, but we see a lot of similarities from the 2022 point onwards as soon as we enter into the IMF agreement and the IMF program plan that we have been allocated right now. In that particular framework, staying on that framework, is there a possibility that we can actually grow our local businesses in a manner where we can actually be safeguarded rather than having a repetitive version of 2022 in the future?
That's a very good question. In my opinion, as long as we are locked into the IMF's general policy framework, it's very hard to do the kind of targeted strategic investments that you want to do. So take something like industrial policy, for example, right? Industrial policy means you pick what's important and what's strategic for your long-term development. That could be a sector, a subsector. It could even be a firm, even though that's not very popular to say out loud. In a lot of cases, it has even been picking firms. But let's put that to aside. Within a general IMF policy framework, fiscal policy, you cannot pick and choose like that. You're not allowed to select. You're supposed to, at best, have some sort of universal policy. That just doesn't work for structural transformation, right? And that's just the fiscal side. On the monetary side, when you include, let's say, the Central Bank Act, which I don't think this government is going to touch, they've made it very clear. Again, you're restrained in monetary policy. How can you think of making a development bank if the central bank cannot capitalize that development bank? That's how it's happened throughout history. So that's one side. But I also want to make this very important point that whatever we do internally has to relate to what's happening around the world as we speak. I was very surprised reading the budget because there are so many references to the Asian Development Bank. A lot of lines of expenditure are funded, backed, supported by the Asian Development Bank. Now, nothing against that bank in particular, but there is an emerging multipolar financial ecosystem that's happening as we speak. And the government doesn't seem to really understand or acknowledge that. We were absent at BRICS, we were absent at the SCO. I don't see us really moving towards ASEAN or the RCEP. This is where the center of gravity of the global economy is moving. And we are still hooked onto these labor-intensive lines of export that are targeted towards shrinking markets in the global north. We are historically members of the global south, right? And I'm sorry if I'm departing from the budget too much, but I have to emphasize.
No. You're making a very valid point, because that is something that we have been telling, even when we ask from the ministers, what sincerely, this is maybe taken as a criticism, but the government has no idea where they're going, because they claim to say they're leading, but their actions do not reflect that. What you just gave that idea right now. The IMF meetings occurred last month. There was no representative from the government side. The ministry, Deputy Minister of Finance, or at least the secretary, was not there. The governor was there, but now the governor is a very independent entity, so not per se from the government per se. If they are not even there, like you said, we were not there at BRICS as well. So what you say makes a lot of sense. And that is a very key question that we really need answers to, because we can't be, we are, blind leading the blind kind of scenario right now at the moment, and we see that a lot. I want to talk a lot about the global implications of this and how we can actually look into actually in a manner, let's get out of this mold of this IMF program and think as free thinkers and maybe come up with a version that will work for this nation. Let's take a short commercial break. I'm in conversation with Dr. Kenneth Zilwa, Global Business Cycle Analyst, and also Shiran Illanperuma. He is a political economist. You're watching Get Real. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone, to Get Real. I'm in conversation with Dr. Kenneth Zilwa and also Shiran Illanperuma, both economic analysts. We are talking about the 2026 budget proposal, which was presented to Parliament last Friday by the Minister of Finance, President Analyst Dissanayake. And if you look at the allocations right now, Ministry of Finance, 634 billion, Provincial Council and Local Government gets around 618 billion rupees. Sri Lanka Public Administration Ministry gets around 596 billion, and Health and Mass Media gets around 554, and Defense Ministry around 455 billion, and education, higher education and vocational training around 301 billion. Now, if you take a look at the total revenue along with the grants, that comes to around 5,300 billion Sri Lankan rupees. Out of that, now that's basically to say that is the amount of money that we have in our pocket, we're spending 7,057 billion rupees. So we're spending around 3 billion, which we don't have. How are we doing that, Shiran? How can we do that? Because that doesn't make sense. Even with the grants, they're coming in. So this is basically saying around 300 billion rupees to fund that, we had to take loans.
Yep. I mean, it's always seemed to me that the agenda was to just make sure Sri Lanka is perpetually indebted to foreign capital markets, right? Because if you see the policy cocktail,
this is very clear.
It's very clear. If you see the policy cocktail, obviously we can no longer finance our own deficits. So who else do you turn to? They're already talking about us going to the international capital markets, but we know already.
Very enthusiastically.
Exactly. And we're already paying some of the highest interest rates of any country. I don't see those rates going down dramatically. So that just keeps us in this deadly cycle, right? We spoke earlier about how the budget itself is so constrained, right? We're counting pennies because most of what is spent goes to these interest payments. That's not going to fundamentally change as long as we keep going on this path of borrowing externally to finance internal deficits.
If you have the power to change, what would be the areas that you would change? I mean, like, I understand you will definitely move away with the IMF plan. Number one position, number two position, number three position, in order to make the changes that we need so that Sri Lanka can be financially independent and we can actually finance our own and make sure that we are no longer in that beggar's state where we keep going and begging from donor nations, asking, give us money for this project, that project. Like you specifically said that ADB has lots of lines in the budget, which means like basically there's a lot of loans coming into the country. Now, apparently prior to 2022, loans were like the, kryptonite. But right now it doesn't seem like that.
I mean, let's be clear, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with taking a loan, right? That's probably going to be part of our story for a while. But to get out of that, to be honest, politically, I wish there was a political will to fight for a moratorium on actually going for these really disastrous, damaging ISBs. Two, to fight for a better restructuring, because the deal we got is really not a good deal for our people.
So the IMF restructuring?
That was what we were hoping for. That was what was promised. But that, they were supposed to renegotiate that. But for whatever reason, that didn't happen. Maybe they felt the balance of forces was not in their favor. But it's never going to be in their favor unless they get the people involved and actually educate them about the real issues, right? About what's needed to get past this. So for me, those two things are very important. One is the moratorium on the ISBs. Two is the restructuring. And three, going back to the point I made earlier, to really look to our partners in the Global South to find patient long-term financing in strategic infrastructure that can power our own industrialization program.
Doctor, about powering our own industrializing programs, looking at the Global South now, there are two big players here. We're talking about China and India, and both are really good with us in terms of diplomatic ties and basically all the relations we have with these two nations are really good. India is a neighboring country. China has a very long-lasting relationship with Sri Lanka. Why are we not harnessing that particular relationship in order to get out of this crisis?
A very, very valid point, Mahieash. In fact, we have been advocating this for quite some time. In fact, while the previous government was there and they were pushing this IMF agenda, we, in fact, advised the government to move to the Global South, to talk to them, where there were plenty of friends on this side of the world. Now, coming back to what Shiran was saying and your question to Shiran about how we need to sort this out, there are two fundamental things that are flawed in this particular way that we are looked at our own revenue streams. One is we have tagged our debt repayments of the restructured ISBs to GDP. So as the coupons are tagged indexed. So as GDP rises, our debt servicing increases. So it's not in our favor. So
GDP rises indicates that the country is doing well, but apparently not, because we're paying
Correct. So higher debt servicing increases automatically. That's the indexation. So if GDP is below a particular number, we revert back to a lower coupon rate. No one has read this carefully, and there was no political discussion
in the IMF.
It's in the debt servicing agreement. I mean, it's clear in black and white. I mean, in the IMF July 2025 report that was tabled, it is very clear. Unfortunately, there is no one paying attention to these things. So that is one part. The second part is, yes, we should look at a moratorium because if you look at the debt composition, many of it is multilateral agencies. About 25% of our debt is multilateral agencies. Then, so if you take roughly our total debt stock as at now is about $107 billion. Out of that, we have $37 or $38 billion in external debt. Balance 67 is about domestic debt. And if you break down that $38 billion foreign debt, you will find that the sovereign bonds still account for about $12 billion. Then we have got off-balance sheet guarantees by state enterprises and SOEs around $5 billion. Rest is bilateral debt. So we have sufficient discourse to talk to our partners in the South, particularly China, India. India is a large trading partner. We have a trade deficit. Trade deficit with India. We have continuously run deficits with China and India, and bulk of these borrowings go into these two countries. I mean, you look at China. China has a trade surplus of about $3.5 billion. India similar, about $4.5 billion. So all the monies that we're borrowing are sent back to these countries by way of goods and services. So we have a genuine discussion or a discussion point with these two countries. How do we rebalance this? What Trump did in the US. So similarly, we should have this discussion. Just because we have a free trade agreement which has 8,000 odd line items which are open to India, we can't export. Otherwise, we would have never had a trade deficit with India. Right? So these are the things that the Chamber of Commerce must go and dig line by line, because exports to Sri Lanka, there are two things. One is, even though the line item is open to Sri Lanka, we must have the products. We must have the products, we must have the
plus
production, we must have the supply capacity, and we must have the quality. All these products have to be quality specific, otherwise you can't gain in export markets. So coming back to my wish list, if I take GDP as the revenue of a country, I would like to see top line revenue, which is external sector revenues, increasing. Now, how do we do that is the question. How do you do that is we need to combine monetary and fiscal policy tools effectively. Shiran alluded to that, picking winners. Some of these countries in the global south did that successfully, particularly South Korea, who started off on the similar blocks as Sri Lanka. They picked winners. I will give a classic example. I made reference to this several times in my other discussions. POSCO Steel, which was a state-owned entity during the 1960s, didn't have any raw materials, didn't have capital. But General Park, he had the vision that South Korea should be an industrialized country, and to do that he wanted to build ships in South Korea. So he needed steel. He had no raw materials, no technology, no industry, no capital. He went out and got it. He went out and took a loan from I think Russia, $300 million, because the IMF and the World Bank laughed at that particular business proposal. But today, POSCO Steel is one of the largest steel. Now they have privatized most of it because they have reached what they want to do. And as a result of that, we found the entire Hyundai shipping was built on that basis. Kia Motors. So you have a chain reaction to this whole thing. So you need to start somewhere. You need to target something and start. Sri Lanka, we have not done that. And I'm really worried because Shiran was right to saying that the global south is the next business cycle, the large, long business cycle which we call. And I keep saying that we are lucky to be in this industrialization, Asianization phase with China and India driving that. It's just that we need to get together as a country and select a few industries which are growth drivers to get to that ambitious target of 7% that we want to achieve.
Shiran, talking about the global south, one of the things that might happen, if by any chance, if let's say for some miraculous thing that could happen to our leaders, and then they actually decide to take a look at other nations and try to look at revenue areas where we can go into those markets and actually earn something that would bring some dough back into our nation. And they keep looking at Asia for that. But what keeps happening, and what has happened in the past, Sri Lanka specifically, we keep falling victim into these superpowers, either whether it's in the West or whether it's in the East. So BRICS seems to be a good bet, but do we have the necessary resources, infrastructure, policies, everything in place right now to go to that particular organization and be a bargaining chip, or rather be another slave and fall back into that same, vicious cycle which we are already in right now? It's just the masters have changed, but we remain to be the slaves.
Look, with BRICS, I think it's not set in stone, right? There's no BRICS secretariat, there's no BRICS website. It's a process. What I'm saying is, we as Sri Lankans, first of all, we need to have our own national project for development. And we need to go to these organizations with that project and influence how it develops. Yes, BRICS is dominated by the big countries, but we have a unique position to use our own history as a small country to rally around other people for a more progressive, I would say, world order than we have at the moment. Now, it's not clear to me that the figures in BRICS, the countries in BRICS, are necessarily going to go down the same path that Europe and the United States have done. I think the conditions are also very different than what they were before. You have a lot of nuclear armed states, right? There's mutually assured destruction. You have a lot of countries that are really, what they're doing is pursuing their sovereignty, their self-interest, right? And that is what I don't see us doing enough of. So we need to go there with our own project, with our own understanding of who we are, where we're coming from, and where we want to go. And we need to shape these institutions while we can. We need to get in at the ground level, because things are happening right now. There's a process happening in the global south of these new multinational institutions. There are discussions going on about how do you democratize the international order? How do you have more effective financial governance, right? There's the new development bank, for example, by BRICS. We are not part of that. We're not part of that conversation. And I think as long as we're not part of the conversation, then of course we can always sit back and worry that what's new is going to be as bad as what was old. But I don't think we should take that mentality.
Why do you, right now, there is no clear indication that the government wants to go there, because we keep asking whether, hey, have you all filed an application to join this organization? The Ministry of Foreign Affairs keeps giving various answers. One time it was yes, we are, or the second time apparently the application has not reached them, or something. There is various versions of that coming out. But there is a lot of support from the Russians, from the Indians, from Chinese governments coming into Sri Lanka and looking at this. Now, at this particular moment, let's say that is a little bit down the line. At this particular moment, how do you see Sri Lanka basically getting into that particular pathway and making sure that our current economic conditions would suit that they would actually invite us to come into their foray and be a part of it? Because right now I don't think we have fixed our issues before even going into something else.
True. I think the invitation is already there. There's already been an open invitation for most of these institutes, right? It's just a matter of the internal issues and making the internal political decisions that this is where the future is headed, this is where we need to go as well, so that we don't get left behind. And on top of that, I don't want to make it seem like there isn't a cost. These are political decisions, but that's why we have political leaders. These are not easy things to do. You look at the tariff war, the latest round of tariffs by Trump, it's very clear that the agenda is to try and split the bloc, right? So the minute you slap on these tariffs, you get people coming one by one and negotiating. So you've already split the block because we're not negotiating together, right? And then someone gets a lower tariff than someone else, and then you think, oh wow, I got a good deal. But actually your tariffs are still higher than they were the day before, right? So it's a complete
This is a
illusion.
clear example of what our textile industry is getting slapped in the United States with tariffs, Doctor.
Yes.
I think the percentage is 30%, but that is on top of another 10% of a base tax.
Correct.
And that is not going to, I mean, when we speak to our textile individuals, they say that they are not okay with that because that's basically 23% of taxes, and absorbing them, the American companies have already said, no way we're going to do that. So anyway, let's take a short commercial break. More to discuss with Shiran Illanperuma, political economist, and also Dr. Kenneth Zilwa, global business cycle analyst, with regard to the 2026 budget proposals right here that been presented to the Parliament on the 7th of November by the President. Let's take a short commercial break. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone, to Get Real. It's our final segment with regard to, we've been analyzing the budget for 2026. With me tonight is Dr. Kenneth Zilwa, global business cycle analyst, and also Shiran Illanperuma, political economist. Both of you all, this is a very small segment. Doctor, let me start off with you. Hopes and dreams versus reality. How do you put the 2026 budget in that?
Well, that's a tough one. Hopes and dreams are still quite...
Hopes and dreams are presented on the 7th, but
I mean,
reality.
Nothing that we could really latch on to and say that it will be achieved. I mean, sadly, that's the reality. Hope is that we will transform ourselves into what we should be doing in terms of how we need to reposition Sri Lanka as a global player in the production space. There is ample opportunity for us to do that. We've spoken about the BRICS particular transformation and how that can be really tapped into. Just to go back on that comment that we said that we have not reached out to BRICS, back in 2010, 2011 I think, when the Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank was set up, we became one of the first signatories to that bank without any capital infusion. They offered it to us. I think there was a $50 million joining fee, which was waived because we initiated it during that particular government period. And we were members to that AIIB. But sadly, we have not really benefited too much from it. I think we have only drawn down about $115 million worth of financing from the AIB, which is a shame because it's backed by this so-called the rejuvenation of the Global South, and also backed by China and the rest of the Global South that is driving this agenda as an alternative to the IMF. Now, so that is an opportunity that I hope we at some point realize and tap into that. Coming back to the core question of where we need to go and how we need to do this, to me, I think we have to be very pragmatic in what we are trying to do. This is not a political statement. This is a national statement. We are pro-Sri Lankan in what we say. We are not biased to any party. When we are being critical to all parties at this program, you know this. To me, I think we have to look at ourselves and look at how we need to use fiscal policy and monetary policy effectively to tap into our local entrepreneurs. We are talking about FDI. Why not we support our local entrepreneurs to become stronger, strengthen their balance sheets? One way of doing that is fiscal incentives. not crowding out the private sector. As it is now, we're crowding out the private sector because we are drawing all their earnings into the government and servicing our debt. Now, the debt comes out from two things. One is our debt stock is increasing. Secondly, that debt stock is primarily externally financed. That leaves us vulnerable to monetary shocks like depreciation. No sooner we have a trade deficit, our currency moves as it's moving now. With that, our external debt stock gets revalued. Then our number, the GDP number, the debt stock number increases. On top of that, our debt servicing increases. If you look at from 2020, I think 2021, or a little beyond that, the total incremental depreciation cost alone to the national budget is about $8 billion. Now, $8 billion is a significant stack of money which could have be pushed into capital formation, right? And we're continuously going the external route, raising more debt, increasing our vulnerabilities greater than what it was before. I've spoken about the negative net worth on the balance sheet, which is reflected in our net international investment position, which is $52 billion negative. You can look up that number. It's published in the Central Bank and the Ministry of Finance. That's the number we should focus on. And how are we going to reduce that? If we are moving in that direction, and if the IMF program has done justice to Sri Lanka, that number should have reduced. But sadly, it's not. Look at the IMF numbers for external debt. It's increasing in absolute terms and as a percentage of GDP. Not only that, our debt to GDP ratio until 2029 remains at 102% of GDP. Plus, our growth is constricted to 3.1% real GDP growth, not nominal. Our nominal will be about 8%. Real GDP inflation adjusted is about 3.1. I mean, what are we doing here?
Indeed. Well, Shiran, taking a look at the budget proposal, it looks like a prescription given to a diabetic patient giving more sugar pills.
Well, I think I want to take this moment to try and bring it back down to earth, right? Because we've talked a lot about, the fiscal, the monetary policy, the industrial policy, global south, foreign policy, but let's bring it down to earth. Why we actually do any of this? We have a situation in this country where 25% of our people are in extreme poverty. Now that's a World Bank calculation. How do they calculate it? If you live with less than $3 a day, that's about less than 30,000 rupees a month. If you've gone to the supermarket or to the butcher and tried to buy a kilo's worth of protein, 30,000 a month is not going to get you far, especially if you have people to feed, right? So the real picture of deprivation in the country is pretty bad. Everything we're talking about is to fix that issue. The government has talked about a poverty eradication program. They've allocated something like 25 billion or whatever. That's less than 5,000 per person in extreme poverty, the World Bank calculation, okay? We are talking about structural transformation, and we're talking about uplifting people's lives, uplifting their income levels. Mind you, it was this particular IMF-driven debt austerity paradigm that has brought us to this situation. We're not going to get out of it by doing the same thing. We have to do something different. And I think I really hope, for the sake of all those millions of people in poverty, that we get our act together to deal with that particular issue, because it's a very serious problem. I mean, if you look at multidimensional poverty, that's 1 in 5 people, 1 in 5 children are multidimensionally poor. That means they don't get enough food, right? Their brain and muscle development is impaired. That's a lost generation we're looking at. And there needs to be a much bigger sense of urgency amongst all our policymakers, amongst all of our academics and intellectuals. And, the middle class needs to also be thinking about this, right? Not just about day-to-day consumption, right? There needs to be a national conversation about this. The ideas that we have discussed, I would say, are in line with trying to solve some of these issues.
Indeed. I sincerely hope any politician was listening and taking notes of the fact, because right now we've been telling this story for, I think, since 2019, doing the same thing and expecting a different result is insanity itself. So that is exactly what we've been trying to do throughout. We've done, as a population, we've done our part. We've changed governments, we've changed regimes, we've changed leaders, we've done all that. And yet here we are with the same kind of results year after year. Hopefully somebody will wake up and understand, well, it is not working for the common man, everyday Sri Lankan. Well, that's all the time we have for you tonight. Thank you very much, Dr. Kenneth, for coming back on the show. Really appreciate your time. And also, Shiran, good to see you. Keep coming back. Hopefully, have a healthy debate about this topic and how we can actually fix Sri Lanka's problems by Sri Lankans themselves rather than looking out.
For sure. Absolutely.
Thank you very much for watching. We'll be back again next week with another notable newsmaker right here on Get Real. See you then. Bye. Such a pretty face.